Grazie. Scusi. Non parlo en italien molto bene. Sono il direttore del Slow Food degli Stati Uniti, così in inglese. First of all, I'd like to apologize that I am not Carlo Petrini, which I hope is not a disappointment. Carlo is in Italy. Well, actually, he may be in Mexico right now, so he may be in this hemisphere. But I am sort of the American face of this extraordinary movement that grew out of Italy and is beginning to transform our idea of people, place, and products all over the world. And I think it is an extraordinary gift from Italy, certainly to us in the United States, where we sit. Can you hear me okay? Am I close enough to the microphone? Where we reside within the belly of the beast of fast food. I am originally from New Orleans, a place that was very slow to embrace fast food. And I know that when I first stumbled upon slow food, we were so thrilled. We thought, slow was always something we always felt embarrassed about. The Protestant work ethic had never made it to New Orleans. Living there is not about work, it's about family and food, football and fishing, sort of the sort of sacred elements of life there. All of a sudden we realized we were part of a global community that recognized the importance of community through food. The important and yet really contradictory challenge between invention and tradition. And maybe I can share with you a little bit about how this has happened in the US. Now, let's see if I can figure out how to move forward. So first of all, this is not me. This is Carlo Petrini, who is really a sort of provocative, an agent provocateur in especially northern Italy, but who really became a global voice for cultures that are stepped on, cultures that are overlooked because of the extraordinary and aggressive nature of fast food. And our origin myth is indeed the origin myth and no slow food. I want to figure out where, does everyone know that slow food was founded in Italy? Yeah. Okay. Does everyone know that we believe in inspiring people to change the world through food? And most importantly, and again, probably because it's Italian, we have a trinity, food that is good, that is good. Everything being sealed and irradiated and sealed for our protection, is that maybe there are some other ways that we have forgotten. So I do look at, this Pax Americana, which maybe only lasted 50, 60, 70 years, didn't quite make a full century. This worldview that we're still, I think, in dialogue with, which is industrializing our food, providing relatively little transparency about where it comes from. And most importantly, the tradition is something that stands in the way of efficiency and scale. And while these are incredibly impressive, noble, and ambitious goals, they do obscure the fact that they come at costs. And the costs we know very well in the US. Obesity, chronic diseases, the gutting of rural communities of their wealth, because we look at rural communities as places where we extract wealth. I mean, this is the economic development system that's embedded in the slow food critique. And I think that it's especially interesting in the US, where it has reached the most, sort of the highest form of development, that extraordinary things are happening here in the US, where we're beginning to question, is this our goal? Does this make people happy? I mean, think of the loneliness of the drive-through, where we're beginning to see marketed on television special bibs for eating in our cars. My gosh, we can do better than that. So the Italian idea is one that I think, and when you think of the arrival of the McDonald's in 1989 on the foot of the Spanish Steps, I myself grew up in New Orleans, so I'm a bit of a Francophile, but I am so grateful that slow food was not developed by the French. If it were, it would be a very heavy, serious movement. They would have burned down the McDonald's, of course, and built up barricades preventing the patties and the buns of neo-imperialism making it into Rome. But the beautiful thing is that it was developed by the Italians. The Italian response was so inventive, creative, light, kind of non-threatening, although beneath it is a very, very radical critique of how we live our lives and how we structure our policy and our economy and our dinner table. And it was sort of in our origin myth, the developing of penne street parties outside of the McDonald's, as if to say, we may not be able to stop this homogenizing, oppressive tyranny of fast food, but we will now name the traditional foods that this system wants to obliterate and make redundant. And this became a global call to action where of that year, December 10th, there was the signing of the Slow Food Manifesto. And again, having come out of really a career of working in the nonprofit sector, every organization, of course, has a value statement, and a mission statement. But oh no, Slow Food has a manifesto. And it's crazy, it's absurd, it's over the top, it's Italian, it's wonderful. And for those of us in these kind of Protestant, self-loathing, English-speaking places, it's so liberating to have a manifesto. You read the manifesto and you think, this is ridiculous. Did they write this, without a sense of humor? And they did and they didn't, but that's actually the best part about it. So we have a manifesto, and the manifesto calls for, ending this tyranny of speed and rationality, and actually embracing this really radical idea. When you think of our Protestant self-loathing, the universal right to pleasure. When you think about it, of course, in the US, that is almost interpreted equally as elitism, which is sort of a very strange idea. And I think it is a Protestant English-speaking problem. As if pleasure could only be enjoyed by those who have the resources, rather than the kind of revolution of everyday life, that pleasure should be woven into all of our lives, and it should not be linked to how much money we spend, which creates this fascinating tension with food, because the food movement landed in the US on these shores among those who were ready to hear it, ready to hear the siren call. And what that was intellectuals, academics, journalists, chefs, white tablecloths. And of course, that wasn't the whole purpose of slow food. The purpose is that this should be woven into our everyday lives and hold back the forces of speed that forces us to eat in our cars after going through drive-thrus, forces us to eat these horrific frozen foods that we put in microwaves that have no sense of love and passion and connection to what food is all about, which is each other. So we are a movement really about people, not about food, which often gets lost, as of course we are obsessed with food and everyone who's connected to it. The other connection, and I think in contrast to the French, and you think of the interest, the sort of culinary interest in the US, you think of the 1950s and 60s and 70s when there were sort of glimmers of interest in culinary techniques other than the microwave, was of course French cooking. Now French cooking is about the alchemy of the kitchen, the sort of the brilliance of what happens with these incredible techniques. In other words, how we obscure inferior ingredients by doing very cool things to them, and it makes it taste beautiful, and it rises, and it's exceptional. Italian cooking is really about the ingredients. It becomes a narrative about ingredients, which is really transformative and helps us to, I think, travel well to many other places where there are also ingredients that are worth defending against the forces of homogenization. So I just want to state that, you know, this is part of the Italian gift. Now, growing up in New Orleans, I was always very confused about Italian cuisine. It seemed to involve something that involved red gravy. It wasn't until I became much older I realized that, no, we didn't actually have Italians in New Orleans, we had Sicilians. But the way that the French colonized people who came, you know, the way the French colonized, and anyone who came to a Creole place would get absorbed into the cooking. So we really didn't have Italian restaurants, or if we did, they were a caricature Italian restaurant. And I think that the more that I, you know, came to learn about food traditions in Italy, is we began to think about a very different kind of map, understanding the place. Because there is no Italian cuisine, no matter how much it gets marketed as such. You know, there's Puglia and Sicily and Piemonte, and this is where you begin to realize sort of not only the culinary pull of the city-state, but also the political pull of the city-state. And I think that, you know, this helps to create a kind of an imaginative way to think about where we live, maybe differently. Maybe during sort of a rather divisive electoral season, we do want to think about the maps that we have been looking at, you know, obsessively for at least a week or two. Is that there are some very clear political boundaries, and certainly, and I think in this last week, a lot of the sort of analysis is looking at the divides between states, the divides between urban and rural. This is a rather kind of black and white, blue and red map of telling us where we live. And food has this incredible ability to help us, you know, think maybe a little differently about where we live. That maybe there are different nations in which we inhabit and participate in. You know, maybe I didn't grow up in Louisiana. I grew up in the Gumbo Nation. And maybe, you know, the Chili Pepper Nation much better describes the battleground states of the Southwest. Food traditions, the bioregion of particular, the bioregion and its influence on food traditions, the people who inhabit places, the foods that either come because they're wild and natural occurring, like alligator and shrimp, or bison, you know, incredibly important sort of icons of place, also interact with people. Now, of course, in North America, there was a people here, you know, a number of peoples here. We've done a very good job to obliterate them from the story, though there's a recent rediscovery in pre-European cooking. But mostly it's a story not of ancient traditions, but of new immigrants, and how that has created a pathway for certain kinds of foods to be shared and created an extraordinary identity that may have very little to do with political boundaries and have so much more to do with the network that brings food from field to market, from lake to plate, and helps us to maybe rethink where we live and how powerful that kind of imagination is upon a country that otherwise, when you think of early 20th century, you know, it was a sort of really struggling with issues of urban decay, obesity, social isolation, sort of the gutting of vast areas of the country for raw assets that we bring in and make money off of, is that maybe we look at food as something that brings us social cohesion, And I would argue that right now, we could use some social cohesion. And we look at this sort of mirepoix of, if our belief at slow food, a global volunteer network of local slow food convivia in Italian, or chapter, which sounds a little less exciting in English, operating with over 1 million people, 160 countries, 150 chapters in the US. So the opportunity to find slow food in your community. The Washington, D.C. Slow Food is a wonderfully vibrant young group of people who are desiring to bring sort of reason and purpose to food, whether it's the social purpose of getting together as a chapter, or supporting school gardens, or this extraordinary work that's going on in the back that you'll be able to sample, sort of heroic farms that are inventing and reinventing tradition through food and cheese making, or taking urban space and transforming it into productive farming lots. We do this in a certain way that is based on this just basic idea that food is a source of profound joy. It's not fuel, no matter what the CDC and the public health experts tell us. Of course it's fuel, but it's also joyful, it's economic development, it's political identity. But it's not political identity that separates us. It is the incredible mechanism that brings us together, the sharing. So much so that being slow food is not necessarily knowing how to bake the most incredible bread, or making beer in your basement. The ultimate expression of being slow is to share food across cultural boundaries, across region, across language. It's sharing. It's sitting down. I mean, how is it that the most radical thing we can do in America is to sit and have dinner with our family? I mean, that's like totally swimming upstream. Because of the pressures that are economic and time, they conspire against us. So it takes incredible fortitude, risk, and courage to resist this. Now in America, we have incredible courage because we do resist this. One day a year for Thanksgiving. So we're making headway. 364 days of the year, we still have some work to do. But on one day a year, we do recognize the importance of the dinner table and the narrative and the care and attention that gets food to the table that we share with people we love. I mean, that is at the heart of what slow food is. So how do you translate that one day where it's an expression of national unity into something that maybe we do maybe one day a week? Is that too much to ask for? Maybe. Maybe it's a potluck once a month. But finding some ways to express our beliefs, our desire to build social capital with people, whether it is the dinner table or where we spend our money or where we spend our time. And so this is sort of our mirepoix of inspiration. This young boy is an advocate, a rather enthusiastic advocate in California, for the Arc of Taste, which is one of our emblematic programs, which rallies around foods that are endangered. And this was his science project. But I think it does certainly speak to the level and interest of inspiration. Now, one of the most interesting projects that is a global slow food project is the Arc of Taste. And embedded in this idea of the Arc of Taste is a recognition of biodiversity, foods and food traditions that the industrial food system thinks is no longer necessary, it's not efficient, it's too complicated, it takes too much time to prepare. The seed stock that doesn't grow watermelons in cubes, it grows ugly, unfamiliar shapes of product. It is itself a catalog of endangered foods, much like Noah's Ark of endangered foods. And there are over 3,000 products on the global slow food Arc of Taste. Over 300 products in the USA. you think about it, 300 products that are in risk of being endangered. And it doesn't take, rocket science to figure out we cannot put all of our eggs in one basket when it comes to the biodiversity of products that we raise and we grow. In the last 100 years in the US, we've lost 90% of our biodiversity in our country, which is an incredible amount. What is extraordinary, though, is we're beginning to see some movement the other direction. How many of you eat heirloom tomatoes? See, 20 years ago, you'd have people saying, what are heirloom tomatoes? And these have grown because there have been consumer demand for something really audacious, which is flavor, rather than growing for shipping. And the problem was, what we had built up in the post-war period was an infrastructure that was incredibly efficient at bringing products that ship very well, but it wasn't particularly adept at delivering products that taste good. And taste good in a particular place, at a particular time, rather than this sort of timelessness of modern, or maybe we're in postmodern life. And what the Ark of Taste is a catalog of products that are endangered, and that once the products join the Ark, they then are recognized by a global community that says, not only are these products valuable and recognized by a global community, but the people who look after them are valued. And that's the really important link between products and people. Because ultimately, slow food, yes, we're a food-obsessed group of people who are constantly texting each other about some incredible dish that's available in some incredible market or restaurant somewhere. But really, we're about people. And recognizing the dignity of the farmers and fishermen who are preserving, defending those products that are otherwise doomed to disappear. And that speaks to a much deeper question about what is the kind of economy and economic development strategies we want to pursue. And that speaks to the economic opportunity that is embedded in place and assets of place. So the biodiversity, the natural assets, the cultural assets, the sort of food traditions that we're losing because of efficiency, our quest for efficiency. And the social capital of building excitement between people who otherwise would have very little reason to connect, supply and demand, chef and farmer, and recognizing that there are these other forms of capital. The product on the left is Creole cream cheese, a project that I was involved with, 15 years ago, when the only people who knew of Creole cream cheese, a German-French dairy product that came to North America and then sort of became its own North American creation, was this incredible sort of curd that sits in this bath of golden cream. And the only people who knew of it were people who were older than 50 years of age. And you'd ask them about Creole cream cheese, and they'd sort of get a tear that would well up in the corner of their eye, like, my mama used to make that, Creole cream cheese. I haven't seen that in years. So we worked with a dairy farming family, the Motes, who were about to go out of existence because they were just falling beneath the weight of debt and producing high volume, inferior milk in a system that only rewarded that. And the economics of it were such that they were just like, we're going to go under. We're going to go under. We'd rather go under fighting, producing products we believe in. So we helped them get off the grid. We connected them with one of the sort of nationally renowned chefs at Commander's Palace, who reworked an old recipe into a volume that worked with their farm and helped them reintroduce it in farmers markets. And I tell you, the opening day, when they came to the farmers market with Creole cream cheese, it looked like an AARP convention. Elderly shoppers from all over the region were like rallying to get the first Creole cream cheese that they had had in like 30 years. And what that helped to set in motion is what in slow food lore is described as a presidium, a sort of a fortress of community of producers and chefs and consumers who support and defend that Ark of Taste product. And now we have a number of different dairies who are producing it, chefs who put it on their menus. Creole cream cheese ice cream is a popular favorite. We've brought it back from the brink of extinction, so much so that you've got to eat it to save it. The other is also a story of colonialism, Spanish colonialism, is the Ozette potato from the macaw from the Pacific Northwest that originally was a potato that the Spanish conquistadors in Peru brought up to the Pacific Northwest and then left them there. But it was a potato whose story no one knew until some people began to bother and say, where did this potato come from? It didn't come from this region. How did it get here? And I think that is one of the interesting things about New World foods. It is the story of migration. They got here because people brought them here and then interacted with the place and with each other. The other crazy thing, of course, is that we are a nation in the US of innovation. We're obsessed with innovation. In fact, we're going to innovate to the point where we're going to lose track of what we were doing in the first place. We are so drawn to innovation, which means we can take traditional ideas and reinvent them, or invent them out of the interaction with others. And this is one example of this kind of innovation. Is one of our projects that was cited. One is our school garden work, where we work with over 3,000 school gardens in the US to grow the next generation of kids who will run towards good food because they know it, they grow it, they have a relationship to it. The other is our problem with meat in America. We are obsessed with our right to cheap meat, regardless of what that means in terms of animal welfare, ecological implications on our water and our land. We're kind of obsessed with this culture of confinement, confining animals and wealth and our taste buds. Our palate is so confined by very narrow ideas of corn-finished meat. So we thought it was important that we would do the crazy idea of bringing the slow meat message of better meat. So farmers who are raising diverse breeds on smaller lands in better conditions to produce a superior product. To who else but football fans who love meat outside of a stadium. It is scientifically proven that meat tastes better outside of football stadiums. And this tradition of tailgating is a wonderful opportunity for nose to tailgating, which is what we do in chapters all over the country. This is outside Giants Stadium in New Jersey for the New York Giants, where we were able to eat and drink, and the more we drank with them, the more we were able to convince them of the importance of animal welfare issues, which was the perfect conversation to have before a game that was played with pigskin and extraordinary amounts of physical violence. But I think this is a sort of inventive, imaginative notion of what role can food play in America as we begin to invent a new economy, because when you think of so many young people have no clear career path, so many of them, and it's extraordinary, are choosing to go back to farming, are beginning to develop, of course, what is now an incredible underground river that is running from east to west. Of course, it is a river of beer, of craft beer, because compared to 25 years ago, where there was pretty much 2 beers in America, there are now thousands. I mean, you can't keep track of it. And it's that inventiveness that is, doing things with beer that, I think were originally illegal. The other thing we see, and this is sort of the work that I come out of, is the fact that we are beginning to build new and craft new institutions that either didn't exist before or we had done our best to destroy them. and I think this is the public market tradition, the ancient mechanism of farmers markets that are public places where competitors, small competitors, compete to sell the fruits of their labor in public settings. This does extraordinary things not only for public life, for preventative nutrition, but also as an incubator for public policy. But food trucks, the fact that we've discovered that food tastes so good when it's produced in a vehicle, not eaten in a vehicle, but produced in a vehicle. So this extraordinary explosion of food trucks and what that's done for legislation in city centers, because it's illegal to have food trucks, and then you have the food trucks down at City Hall arguing over zoning. I mean, this is doing wonderful things for democracy in America, because we're beginning to debate, where do we want our food? How? How do we develop our economy? How do we animate public space so that it is vibrant and full of people arguing about food? Things that, again, like in the back of the room, this extraordinary rise in urban agriculture, of taking unused land and making it productive. Not because we're going to feed ourselves solely on urban food, but we're going to connect to food, connect to seasons, connect to each other, and be really creative about how to utilize the food. And then new ideas like community-supported agriculture, CSAs you may hear of, and CSFs with fishermen. These are extraordinary responses, things that were not supposed to happen. They weren't invented by philanthropy or government. They were invented by consumers and producers saying, I want a different kind of reality. And we have the power to do that. It takes a lot of hard work, it's hard to sustain, but we can invent a different future. And I think food plays an incredible role with it, in part because we all eat, and we shop regularly, and hopefully cook regularly. And I think that the policy incubation has been incredible, where we have seen very large, generally unresponsive government agencies that are so designed for large, big agriculture. They have found space for small and innovative agriculture, again, not because of some grandiose concepts that have been born inside government and think tanks, but they've been born and invented in schools and in communities. That is the promise of slow food. This is not a kind of left-right, urban versus rural. This is the wormhole in the universe where people rediscover each other and discover community and begin to sort of think up what are some new ways in this kind of crazy postmodern era where everything seems to be exploding or contracting all at the same time, is that we can begin to build institutions that make us happier, that bring us passion and joy for food and each other and the important places we are. And one maybe that I can speak to is the food incentives. This grew out of farmers markets, which were sought to be kind of elitist institutions where chefs and the foodies go to get their the meals that involve vertical garnish and arugula and products we didn't know how to pronounce 10 years ago. Well, what we found was that farmers markets are not particularly efficient at moving vast volumes of product. They're not like really efficient, hyper-efficient kind of, like a food bank where you get in line, you get your product, it's handed to you. They're very inefficient. They're inefficient because when you want to buy mushrooms, you have to go to the mushroom man. And when you want to buy a pie, you go to the pie lady. And when you want tomatoes, you have to choose between this tomato man and this one. You have all these different checkout lines, which make it incredibly inefficient. If the efficiency you're interested in is moving vast volumes of produce. But instead, if the efficiency that you want is learning. I mean, there's nothing I can think of when I'm queuing up, trying to figure out what God's name does this man have in his bag, because I can't recognize it. And you sort of ask him, oh, that's a Jerusalem artichoke. I had no idea. What do you do with a Jerusalem artichoke? And you begin to have this thing that is so uncommon nowadays, a conversation with someone you don't know about food and how to prepare it. And what we began to find in the farmers market movement, and And remember, farmers markets grew at like 400% over the last 15 years. I mean, they didn't exist. And now every community wants one because it's an indicator that civilization exists in their community. And what we began to discover was that these are incredibly good places to exert behavior change among consumers. And not just consumers who can take risks on buying things like bok choy, tot soy, and all these like crazy soys that we didn't know about. But they also are really effective in mainstreaming people who are on the margins. So providing incentives to food stamp shoppers who take the risk to stumble into the farmer's market, where they may not be familiar with shopping, learn sort of the rules of, oh, there's no one checkout line, you have to talk to different people, and they get rewarded for every $20 you spend and you take that risk with your food stamp money, you get 20 more. So recognizing that for those who are further down the economic ladder, it is riskier for them to try new foods, healthy foods. We reward that risk. Much in the way that the small farmers are rewarded for their risk to come to the city, they gain access to consumers in a group environment. So I think recognizing the sort of risk management is a program that grew out of farmers markets and is now a $100 million USDA program in the current Farm Bill. We'll find out what future farm bills are like. But this is an extraordinary sort of development of food policy that came out of the grassroots. We have, and I think importantly out of that experience, what we have learned is begin to discover community. The importance of community through food. Because you think about it, we're all craving it. We're all running around like lunatics and not connecting to the people who are near us. And so we see this as a real opportunity in our chapters, to connect with our chapters, to do potlucks and farm tours and culinary lessons where you don't have to feel embarrassed if you don't actually know how to can vegetables, you know, sort of workshops and hands-on learning. But I also think the most important thing is eating together and the incredible opportunity of eating with those whom we think of as the other, because it humanizes each of us in the process. And when you think of the incredible influx of new food culture, new food traditions through immigrants, this is something that we're particularly excited about because it helps us to begin to develop empathy, so that immigrants are not just the people whose hands touch our food, but we never touch them, whether they're sorting shrimp on an assembly line, on a shrimp boat, or in the back of a kitchen. But immigrants come to our country with food tradition, with food knowledge, probably more food knowledge than we have. And this is an incredible opportunity to connect and recognize their assets that are worth sharing. And we will be sharing that, I used to say a year from now, 9 months from now, 6, 7 months from now, in Denver. And again, importantly, not on the coasts, where I know we've smugly all got it figured out on the coasts, but in the center of the country, where people are beginning to redefine where they live through food. And we will be staging 3 days of eating, drinking, pleasure and responsibility, culinary workshops, book signings, dinings. Of course, it's Denver. There may be a whole new understanding of what potluck is all about. But most importantly, sharing food and food tradition and culture in a very public setting. And certainly Slow Food Mexico will be there. The First Nations Turtle Island Slow Food will be there. Slow Food Peru, Brazil, Chile, Cuba, South Africa, and most importantly, Slow Food Italy. And that's why we are calling the Slow Food Nations, not Slow Food Nation. Because not only here in the US can we begin to reimagine what nation are we a part of. Are you a devotee of beer and therefore are a member of the Slow Beer Nation? Or do you come from India and are part of Slow Food India? And so this will be an incredible opportunity to bridge. The bridging that we do in our local slow food chapters, the bridging that we do around our dinner tables, and the very public bridging that we will be doing in Denver, and make this an annual national ritual, so that the only time that we sit around the table together is not just Thanksgiving, but maybe also at Slow Food Nations. So with that, I hope I haven't gone over in time. I wanted to give you sort of a sense of what it means to be slow in the fast food nation. We are a creative and mischievous group of people trying to subvert the dominant paradigm of speed and efficiency. But we do that with great humor and love and passion for food. And I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to share that with you this afternoon. So thank you very much. Grazie.
We have a couple of other people to tell us about their operations, but just a second before Richard sits down, will you take a couple of questions?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So Luigi, please.
Yes, thank you very much. It was most interesting. I was born and raised in southern Italy, in Puglia.
Oh.
And as I remember, the most, you're talking about getting together and doing things culturally together and getting attached to other people. Food was the catalyst for that, not only from the point of view of consuming it, but also from the point of view of preparing it. I still remember when my mother and father less because he was working outside, and so mother was in charge of it. We had a whole room for tomatoes. What you did was you took the tomatoes, you bought them. You could not grow them, you could maybe, but you couldn't grow 100 pounds of tomatoes. So the 100 pounds of tomatoes were placed on the floor. They were then, you wait until they were ready and ripe. Then eventually you wash them, you boil them, and you pass them through this machine that eliminated the seeds, and then you bottled it, and you kept it for the whole entire year. For that to happen, just equally for wine to be made, and equally for jams to be made. I remember the cotognata. It was very famous. I mean, we had literally hundreds of pounds of these things. For that to happen, you required at least one of the parents to be there all the time to really help you and help them. So I think the structure of our life has changed radically now. We cannot expect that to happen because typically we have two spouses working or two people working within a household. Industry has changed everything so that it allows for two people in a household to work all the time. So you go to the Giant and you get, or Safeway or whatever, and you get canned tomatoes. And that's very, very convenient. How do you, and then there is, of course, the issue of genetically modified foods, which penetrates everywhere. So even though you may be able to control the preparation of the foods and the quality of the foods, the aspect which has to do with genetic modification or hormonal modification of milking a cow. I mean, the cows in the United States are constantly fed hormones. So, whereas in Europe they're not. But I mean, that's an interesting point. But I was surprised to learn that here we still have milk produced by cows who have been given lots of hormones for them to increase tremendously their productivity, the production of milk itself. So all of these are, yes, cultural issues, but they are mainly economical issues, whether it has to do with, you know, the two parents working versus one or other issues. I don't want to take up another half an hour, but can you comment on that?
Well, there are a couple of things there. I mean, one is the question of scarcity versus abundance. And I think that there is a recognition of paying special attention to a harvest that comes in and treasuring that and using every element of that product. And doing that as a shared activity, of course, again, in our very private Protestant kind of, I have to own a lawnmower, and my neighbor has to own his own lawnmower, and the other neighbor owns their own lawnmower. I mean, we're so withdrawn and private, and there's very little that we share and that we do collectively. But again, I do think there's a shift. I mean, myself, since I manage millennials, and it is why the gray hair, I do recognize that there are some shifts undergoing our culture, the sort of priorities and what we want. I don't think we're going to go back to living in sort of medieval values of small villages, and yet you do see younger people going back to the land, and not in a kind of 1960s going back to the land. There's a little bit more recognition that there are some choices that people are making, trade-offs that people are making, and some people are, if they can afford to go back to land, crave that. I think most importantly, we need to meet people where they are. I mean, there is a desire for transparency in our food, to know if it's GMO food or not. These are huge political fights. Industrial food does not want us to know. They want to make it very difficult to demand it. What's interesting, though, is large companies are figuring out, I think we lost this battle. I'm gonna market my good as GMO free because there's too much uncertainty there. So even when we're not winning the regulatory battle, we might win it in the marketplace. But it's tough. I mean, the systems of industry are strong, and I think in the next few years may only get stronger. But our movement is also growing stronger, especially if we demand it. But no, there is a desire for a different kind of living, and I think this is sort of what part of slow food is part of that response, that we're missing something. And either we run to it or we don't.
But people cannot afford it. If you go to Baltimore, in the little corner store, mostly African American areas, Johns Hopkins, where I work, what you find is not the slow food, because people cannot afford it. They buy the fast foods because they are affordable.
Yeah.
But so how do you confront that problem if you don't create a major political system that is responsive to societal needs?
Well, I think these are still very early days in the food movement. It wasn't supposed to happen here. But I think there are links with food sovereignty and sovereignty itself. I mean, fast food is cheaper in some ways. A bag of potato chips is remarkably expensive for how little food you get. It's emblematically sort of valuable, but it's not very valuable. It's very little food. Why people do not cook these complicated meals is time and knowledge. But if we can link that with a sense of sovereignty and power over one's lives, that is a compelling argument. But no, it's not easy.
Other remarks? Yes, sir?
Yeah, about the slow meat. It was hard for me to understand what the ultimate goal is about that.
Yeah.
On the long sustainability umbrella that we're living. I don't know if you can clarify a little bit.
No, I'm sorry. I did kind of gloss over slow meat. So this was an exciting challenge for me as a vegetarian, lifelong vegetarian, to take on the question of meat consumption in an organization whose first big fight against the EU was in defense of lardo, because do not touch our lardo, it must survive. And if you have ever attended Salone del Gusto in Turin, there's like sort of the whole, it's the whole walk of meat and cured meats and vast amounts of meats. We have become a culture where we consume just vastly, way too much meat. We have a very outdated notion, not only in Europe, but especially in the United States, that affluence, success, equals a hunk of protein in the middle of the plate, surrounded by a cast of characters, also known as specialty crops or vegetables. And that we've got to get past this idea, that we have got to begin to consume less meat, raise less meat, this rush to confinement of more animals confined, not on the land, but actually in confinement, is incredibly harmful to rural wealth, to ecology. Not that necessarily raising animals is harmful to the ecology. In fact, there's some incredible models of regenerative agriculture where animals actually add value to the land. They trod upon the land, they aerate it, they provide materials for the land. Our goal should be better meat, which is going to be more expensive, unequivocally more expensive. But there is dignity for the farmer and for the animal who is raised under better conditions. And the only way we can afford that more expensive meat is if we resist this cheap industrial meat and eat less of it. And meat should be flavor rather than focus of every meal. I mean, the knowledge, the incredible knowledge in traditional peasant cooking of beans and rice, there's no meat involved there. If there is, it's very little bits of meat. But it's so out of sort. And I think that what's interesting is in the United States, which of course, I mean, what I'm saying would, put me up in front of the House of Un-American Activities Committee. This is an incredibly inventive culinary world in the U.S. Incredibly inventive things being done around vegetable-centric cooking. This doesn't have to be a cooking as if you will suffer because you eat less meat. And I think what some of the chefs are doing are creating some trends that may make it increasingly popular and interesting to eat less meat and do extraordinary things with less meat. I mean, this is an age of angry vegans, producing cheeses without meat, but with almond milk. And where slow food is that we're not trying to stop meat consumption, just reduce it, and that the meat we eat should matter.
I think we can take maybe one more question, and then we need to let our other guests speak. Please.
Thank you. My question is bifold. The first part is, what do you believe about the nation of immigrants, which the United States is? The slow food movement did not prevail because that's what happens in the rest of, or used to happen in the rest of the world. And the second part is, how come on the basis of the Mediterranean diet, Italy and Greece and the surroundings are now developing child obesity, which are top on the world records? So would you have any answers to that? Any thoughts?
Well, one thing, we should pat ourselves on the back that we have been able to export the American diet even to the Mediterranean. And it's a very alluring idea. I mean, the symbols of, the hamburger and the portions that we eat, and the fact that our lives have involved less physical activity. I mean, you sort of do the math, this is what happens. Japan would be another place where, chronic diseases and obesity were unheard of, are now becoming more the norm. This is why it's a global problem that we need to address the relationship between personal behavior and policy behavior. There's systems that we can invest in. In terms of the question of immigrants, of course, there's been a really interesting study of looking at immigrants who come here. When they were born elsewhere and come to the US, they maintain a much healthier profile versus their kids who grew up here, consuming vast amounts of milk and eating vast amounts of meat and sugar and soft drinks. And it's the allure of becoming American. Our new president tweeted these incredible images of him eating, fast food, because these are the symbols that say who we are. Well, these are not the symbols of who we are. These are the symbols of some people want us to be. And that's why I think embracing immigrants who come here, embracing them and their food traditions, that we value them, we elevate their importance in teaching us about food traditions that have not been destroyed. So,
I'm going to ask you to, we'll have a chance to kind of chat afterwards. And
I'm not going anywhere.
Right, and so, you can all ask Richard questions.
other guests here today, and I'm going to introduce from Firefly Farms. The president of Firefly Farms is Mike Koch, and he's been making artisan goat cheese in Maryland for over 15 years. So, Mike.
Thank you. Good evening. I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here with you tonight and hear Richard speak about slow food. The first thing I'll tell you about Firefly Farms is we are multi-year winners of the Snail of Approval Award from the Slow Food DC chapter. So I'll be quick. Firefly is a manufacturer of artisan goat's milk cheeses in the mountains of western Maryland, an area that was once very agricultural and filled with small family farms. It's 2.5 hours west of here. We had our first 6-inch snow yesterday afternoon. It's beautiful. There's a vacation spot there, Deep Creek Lake, and the Wisp Ski Resort, so please do visit us. But it's a place that's perfect for small farming, and a lot of it animal grazing and dairy farming. I can't resist tagging on to the comment about CAFO meats. CAFO, Confined Animal Feeding Operation. If you came here as a slow food activist, as a food activist, believing that it was important to buy local, it is triply, doubly, quadruply important to buy local meat and buy sustainably raised, pastured meat. Confined animal feeding operations are some of the operations that are contributing most to greenhouse gas emissions. So my little editorial ad. We're committed to two things: excellence in cheese making and sustainability. Since we began, we've won a collective 105 awards, 102 of them for individual product excellence, including 2 that we learned of just yesterday at the World Cheese Awards, which were this year held in Spain. 2 of the cheeses that I'm serving for you are the 2 cheeses that just won again medals at the World Cheese Awards, the Black and Blue and the Merry-Go-Round. 3 of those are company-wide awards, including the Snail of Approval, and a couple of years ago we won the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Dream Big Small Business Award, so we're quite proud. We are in this to put people to work in rural America. We now employ 19 people, the majority of them cheesemakers, who do everything by hand. The only equipment that we have are stainless steel vats where the milk is pasteurized slowly and cultures are added and it sets. It is then scooped by hand, turned by hand, brushed by hand, washed by hand, and we are incubating in the region a cheese-making culture that has already produced a second cheesemaker, High Country Creamery, which will go into operation this fall, and we're quite proud of that. On the sustainability scale, I'll just say 3 things quickly. We believe in the sort of 3 measures of sustainability: economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. On the social front, I've talked about our commitment to putting people to work. We believe that it's important to give back to the community. Rural America has been hollowed out. We have, since our inception, offered our employees head of household wages, health insurance, life insurance, paid time off, paid sick leave, and last year implemented a 401k profit sharing plan. On the environmental side, farming can be, and cheese making can be environmentally damaging. We have 7 small family farms, all within a 30-mile radius of our creamery, that we have contracts with that commit those farmers to humane animal husbandry, no chemical or synthetic fertilizers on feeds, no growth hormones, and commitment to quality expressed through pricing. We calculate a price based on the level of protein, the level of fat, and the level of somatic cell and bacteria. 2 of those things we want to be high, 2 of those things we want to be low. Our average farmer last year in rural Appalachia made $54,000. That's average. And those farms have responded. The milk quality is exceptional and shows up for us in our yield, which makes us and the consumers very happy. We also go to great lengths to collect the bioactive byproduct of cheese making, sweet whey, and we refrigerate it and provide it free of charge to livestock farmers who in Western Maryland are doing pasture-raised non-CAFO meat. So they feed the animals the whey, and it results in some pretty spectacular pork chops. And then last thing I'll say about sustainability, we invested in a 30 kilowatt solar installation last year. In our region, people talk about solar as being not viable. We have happily shown them that they are wrong. The installation has been up for a year and has generated 50% of the electrical use that we require through a combination of generation and conservation. When we implemented the solar panels, we also implemented low voltage lighting, and all the electricity was on motion detection, so as soon as the room was empty, the light would go off. And between those 2, we've now generated 50% of our electricity. So last, I'll describe the cheeses that you're going to eat tonight. I brought 3. The first Cabra La Mancha is an orange rinded cheese. It's washed rind. It's aged about 3 months. All of our cheeses are sort of known because they're a combination of European tradition and American innovation. The Cabra La Mancha is a twist between a Taleggio and a Manchego. And it's semi-soft, and as it ripens, it will get more and more odoriferous, like a Limburger, and you've got one that's middle-aged. I often say cheese is like cheese making is the art of calculated decay, which I find to be a wonderful metaphor for life. Ironically, Cabra La Mancha in January of this year won at the Good Food Awards, where I met Carlo Petrini and heard him speak at the as a keynote speaker at the Good Food Awards ceremony. And then the middle cheese, which is sort of your palate cleanser tonight, is Marigoat Round. It's a soft ripened round, a cross between queso fresco and camembert from goat's milk. I brought you one that is in the younger part of its life, so it is smooth and creamy and buttery and will be palate cleansing for you. The finish is the black and blue, which is a cross between ricotta salada and gorgonzola dulce. It's goat's milk, deeply blued, with a nice hint of salt and a sweetness that's there because we use a galactose negative culture that leaves some of the milk sugar. So enjoy. Thank you.
And our second guest is Niraj Ray, and he's coming from Cultivate the City, and they're an urban farming organization here in DC. So
hello everyone, and thank you very much for having me here today. I want to talk a little bit about Cultivate the City. Surprisingly, we actually are connected with both other panel members. Slow Food actually got us connected with Chipotle earlier this year, and they've helped sponsor a lot of our community build days. I'll talk a little bit about our community build days later on when we jump into school programs, and we also have a CSA program, and last week we featured Firefly Farms cheese in our CSA shares. So Cultivate the City, our goal is to provide urban residents with the tools, education, and resources to grow their own food, and on top of being able to grow their own food, also being able to prepare it and share that with their other community members. One thing that we do different than a lot of other farmers is we concentrate on vertical growing, where you would grow 1 or 2 plants, we grow at least 22 plants. We mainly grow basil and strawberry, and that's what we do for on a commercial scale. We provide to certain restaurants who we cater grow for, and we recently started a rooftop farm for the Nationals at the stadium. And that's a 3,600 square foot farm, and they use all the produce that we grow there in their food services and dining. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we mostly do vertical farming, and another focus for us is education, and we really want to help create the jobs of the future. We recently partnered with Gallaudet University to start creating more urban farms on their campus and helping create more jobs around farming in DC. And one of the other locations that we manage is Union Market, and on their rooftop they have about 60 tower gardens, and all of that produce is used for one of the restaurants, and they hire Gallaudet students to manage these gardens and serve the produce in their restaurant. So I was mainly going to talk about our school garden programs today, and there's 3 schools that we partner with: Minor Elementary School, J.O. Wilson, and C.W. Harris, all 3 of which are in the Northeast. And at these schools, we work with about 4 to 6 classes throughout the school year, and they come out in the garden every single week, and they have projects where they're either planting a native garden, helping create houses for mason bees, or making their own finished food products. This past year we made chili oil, hot sauce. We make a lot of fruit leathers from the different fruits that we're growing. They blend it up, and it's a good alternative snack to the stuff that you'll find in the grocery store. Yeah, so through the school gardens we have the CSA program, which through each school we serve about 20 different families, and we grow all the produce within the network of farms that we have within DC. We have about 25 different locations, and each one concentrates on growing different produce. In the school gardens we grow pretty much everything to really show what can grow and how you can use the space around you to make a lot of these foods. Every month during the second weekend of the month, we have build days on both Saturdays and Sundays, where we engage community members, parents, and really just anyone that wants to get out and learn about what we're doing and also help upkeep the garden at the same time. It's also a good chance for us to partner with other businesses. Like I mentioned, Chipotle earlier this year, they help sponsor a lot of our community build days. And we work with other restaurants in our area to really, they usually use the food that we're growing in the garden as well to prepare for the volunteers. One of the other things we do is Growing Healthy Schools Month, which is in October, and we have different chefs and farmers come to the school and speak to the students about why it's important with what we're doing, and they also take field trips out to the different farms and restaurants to see them in their element. And probably one of the biggest school events that we do is Strawberries and Salad Greens Week, which is the 3rd week in May. And over the past 2 years, we've started to reach out to more and more DC public schools. Last year, we provided strawberries for 60 different schools, and they had living plants inside the classrooms where students would come and do. They would have tasting demonstrations of the different greens we grew. So they had kale, mustard greens, tot soy, a lot of other things, to really taste the flavor profile of different greens. Salad isn't just salad, but what makes up a salad, and how do you tell the difference between these different greens? And then strawberries, we all know what those taste like. But that's what really drew the kids in. And strawberries are really interesting plants. I really love them for the school garden because 1, it grows all year round. It comes back year after year. And 2, you can see all parts of the plant on the same living thing. You can see a flower, you can see the flower or the fruit that's actually forming, and you can see them propagating and making more strawberry plants. And then finally, we also started a rooftop garden center earlier this year, and we just put up 3 greenhouses this past week on them. And next year, we're going to start having family cooking classes there, where once a month the parents can come with their kids, and we're going to prepare the food that we have growing in all of our different gardens, and really draw those connections between how the food really means much more than just what we're growing, and really bringing in traditional recipes and trying to. One of the cool foods that we started to produce more of this year is amaranth.